Merry Christmas, and the hope, peace, joy, and love of Christ be with you all on this day. When I was in the 5th grade, I went spelunking with a group of preteens from my church. We went exploring and stayed overnight in a cave. They strapped hard hat helmets to our heads, and each with a light on it, and we followed a guide through cracks and crevices and openings in the rock that had been carved naturally over thousands of years. I think that the most vivid memory from that trip was following in line with the others until we finally came to an opening in the trail through the cave that was big enough for our entire group to sit on the ground with our backs against the cave wall. We sat there in a circle, really just staring at one another, until our guide told us to all switch off our lights on our helmets. One by one, we did this until our guide finally switched his light off. And in that moment, I experienced the most profound darkness I have ever experienced. It was terrifying. I knew I wasn't alone. I was with my group, and we could trust that our helmet lights would turn back on the moment we hit the switch. But what if somehow all of the batteries failed at the same time? What would we do? How would we get back out? What if we were stuck wandering in this pitch black darkness forever? Our guide forced us to sit in that darkness as he told us a story. Now, I remember it was so dark that even though I knew my eyes were trying to adjust, trying to dilate and take in any light that they could, there was no light to be found anywhere. Until suddenly, without announcing it, and with great dramatic effect, our guide switched his light on. In an instant, I was completely relieved, but I was also completely blinded. The light was so strong for a moment. The light was the only thing I could see. Now, darkness is the biblical image we use to describe the difficulties that often face us and face our world. But it is exactly in that darkness that God decides to show up. Even hundreds of years before the birth of Jesus, God sent word through the prophet Isaiah of hope for people in hardship and despair. He said that the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in the land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. And then after Jesus, the Gospel of John, it doesn't begin with a baby born in a manger and with shepherds and angels and animals all gathered around it. It speaks instead of the profound work of God to take away darkness. It tells us that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being through him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. At Christmas, we worship and celebrate the fact that God was not willing to sit idly by as the world spun into deeper and deeper darkness. This child, whose birth the angels and shepherds proclaim, is God's response to our hope, to our faithfulness in God's love. He is the gift of assurance that God will make everything right. He is the light given to shine in the midst of our cries in whatever darkness we may find ourselves. God, who created and sustains all things, decided to take on flesh that the world could be redeemed. And we are created in God's image, but in Christ, God took on our image, reflecting the best of what we could be, showing us how much God values us and finds us to have worth. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, the song says, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. And when he did appear, a light burst forth into the world in a way that said that the God who created was recreating and making all things new. He is God's response to our hope, to our faithfulness, to our trust in God's love and ways over the other ways of the world around us. He is the light given to shine in the midst of the darkness in which we so often walk. In Jesus Christ, the child born in Bethlehem, we recognize Emmanuel, that God is with us, that no matter what we are facing, no matter how difficult things may seem, No matter the forces we think are bearing down on us, God is with us. So throughout this season and on this day, we celebrate. We may gather with family, perhaps. We may sing songs, light candles, tell stories, and pray prayers. And in all of it, we are bearing witness to the light of God that continues to spring forth into the world when we let it take root in us, when we put our faith in that light, and when we allow it to grow within us. We bear witness to the fact that God's love is so grand and universal that God's love and God's light can reach us wherever we are, even and especially when we don't have it all together. It comes amidst all of our sorrow, sin, grief, pain, and shame, and there is hope that God can redeem it all because Christ came. Today, on Christmas, we celebrate the gift of God's light and love for the world. One of the things I love most about this time of year, the lights on the houses, the trees, and the windows. Now, in our family, it's traditionally my job to put the lights on the Christmas tree before we decorate it. My wife will tell you that it's because I'm a little OCD, perhaps, and I like it to be perfect. I like to think that there's just something special about setting the foundation, the most important part. If there are no other ornaments or decorations on the tree, at least there are the lights. I understand that there are actually some parts of the world, particularly those in the north, where it stays dark and cold throughout the winter months, where people keep their lights up all year long because as they remain enshrouded in dark skies, they need the lights to lift their spirits and bring them joy. And perhaps one of the strangest lighting traditions that I've heard of is those people who become part of their own light display. As cars drive by at night, you will find their family completely wrapped in Christmas lights, dancing and waving as others stare and wonder. I understand that it was St. Francis of Assisi who brought Christmas to prominence in the early 1200s. There was a time when it didn't have the cultural prominence that it has today, taking up most of the months of both November and December. In fact, even though the church celebrated it, it wasn't a full season like Advent, like we have now. Francis, however, was deeply moved by God's great love through the gift of Christ. He recognized that there is no Easter, no crucifixion, no resurrection, no salvation through Christ without first the birth, the incarnation. He understood that Christmas shows us Emmanuel in a way that no other expression can touch. He wanted the season to dazzle us, to sparkle, to shine. So he strung lights on trees. Francis knew that we need to show the world what God bursting forth is like. We need to live in a way that brings in John 1 and brings it to life even today. We need to live in a way that shows Christ's light in all things, in all people, that showcases the power of the light piercing the darkness. I know that those people who wrap themselves in light are simply making a festive statement. They're getting swept up in the cultural elements of the season. But if they were making a faith statement, then perhaps they would be onto something. Perhaps we should keep the lights up a little longer this year when we need them, even more than ever. After all, at Christmas, we remember that Christ shines in all things and outshines the darkness. That light is available for the world to see through those who live with Christ's Spirit all year long. It's your light. It's mine. And we've got to let it shine. We bear witness to the power of the light of love of God each time we offer forgiveness that seems unwarranted, when we give of ourselves instead of taking all that we can, when we work for something greater than ourselves, when others feel no higher calling, when we live lives as people of peace, when we hold on to hope when it seems like all hope is lost. Each time we live so the world can see more of Christ, another light is lit, and a little more of the darkness is overcome. It is Christmas. And on Christmas, we celebrate the birth of Christ, the light of the world. We also remember that the work begun in the manger is only the beginning. The incarnation led to the resurrection and our salvation. And the salvation work within us can spill over into the world on this day and in the days to come. Remember the light of Christ within you Let it shine into the darkness of the world on this day and every day, for there is no darkness that can overcome it. Merry Christmas.